Well, early voting has actually started in some states, believe it or not. Matthew Wilson, SMU political science professor, here to kind of catch us up to date on what's going on in the race for the White House. First debate certainly was interesting, was widely watched. Did you find it informative in any way?
It was revealing, I would say, more than informative.
Yeah.
Not a lot of substantive policy discussion, but it certainly showcased the kind of temperament and approaches of the two candidates. And so I think in that sense, voters got a little bit of insight into how these candidates might approach policy crises, that sort of thing.
I don't know how many people pay attention these days to endorsements by newspapers, but a couple of interesting ones. For the first time, USA Today, while not endorsing Hillary Clinton, said Donald Trump is unqualified. Now, they're editorially a fairly liberal newspaper. A very conservative newspaper, the Arizona Republic, which used to be owned by the family of former Vice President Dan Quayle, in fact, very conservative editorial board, saying Donald Trump is simply not qualified to be president.
Well, and of course the Dallas Morning News did the same
exactly,
thing,
right.
which has traditionally endorsed Republicans. What this reflects is what we've known for a while, that is that there's a big divide between Donald Trump and the established elements in the Republican Party. These newspaper editorial pages reflect that. Donald Trump is not a sort of policy wonk, Chamber of Commerce, good government Republican. And that faction of the party has very, very little patience for him. That's showing up in these newspapers that are saying, look, we've endorsed Republicans in the past, but he's a different kind of beast.
Some more traditional Republicans would be the two who are running for, or Republican and traditional Democrat would be the two who are running for vice president. That would be Mike Pence and Tim Kaine. Kaine, Democrat, senator from Virginia, and Mike Pence, very conservative Republican governor of Indiana.
Yes, exactly. And I think that when people watch that debate, a lot of them will
if they watch it. They probably won't.
If they watch. But people who watch may well look at those two and say, wow, I wish those were at the top of the ticket. I wish that was my choice for the presidency.
Because they're a couple of policy wonks. They're people who know policy.
They're solid, relatively likable figures within their two parties. I would expect a pretty civil discussion between the two of them. I would expect it to be more policy focused, a little less theatrical than the presidential debate. So I think it'll be a good substantive exchange. Not as many people will watch, though, as the president.
Donald Trump hinting that in the next debate he may take the gloves off and bring up topics, he considers them issues to be considered in the debate, like Bill Clinton's infidelities. And clearly a hint to what he, taking the gloves off, the Miss Universe controversy that he is bringing up again today on Twitter.
I don't think those things do Trump a lot of good, honestly. Talking about those sorts of issues just plays to the constituency that he already has locked down. Donald Trump has gone about as far as the kind of reality show shtick can take him. If he's going to win the presidency, he has to appeal to educated white voters, right? That's a constituency that's in play.
And women who may be turned off by references to the fat Miss Universe.
Absolutely. He's got to expand his base, not just fire them up even more. That requires some kind of substantive policy discussion. If he's talking about Miss Universe and Jennifer Flowers and Bill Clinton's scandals, he's not building from the base that he's already got.
Really quickly, why does early voting matter? Why is it so important these days?
Well, it's becoming more and more common around the country, and it also serves to start to lock in the race a lot earlier. I mean, there will be important things that happen over the course of the next month, but people who are voting today aren't going to be able to respond to those things. They're already casting a ballot. So I think there's a kind of a national debate that needs to happen over how much is too much, how much is too early in terms of people casting their votes.
All right, and we've got a little time before it starts here in Texas, but
that's right.
Yeah, thanks as
Thank
always.
you.